There is so much creativity in everybody's mind. You have to release it, and you will not release it if you have hour after hour after hour of meetings, particularly at certain points in your life as well. If you have children or grandchildren, in my case as well, you haven't even got the breathing space in the evenings or at weekends to think. It disappears. And you need that in work to have the kind of innovations that excite us all. You need time, and that's the thing we're losing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Whole Brain at Work podcast. I'm Karim Morganetti. I'm a CEO, entrepreneur, investor, and cognitive scientist focused on how thinking impacts management and organizations. In my work leading Herman and building a new AI startup, Ned.ai, and in working with thousands of leaders and teams around the world, I've become deeply invested in understanding the interplay between how we think, how we work together, and how emerging technologies are reshaping both. So that's what this podcast is all about.
And I'm Anne Herman-Niddy. Today we're diving into a topic that I think triggers instant PTSD for most knowledge workers today, and that is the topic of meetings.
That's right. We're talking about the $37 billion productivity crisis that's hiding in your everyday calendar. And our guest today has built technology that essentially holds a mirror up to our meeting culture. And a little spoiler alert, what it reflects is not pretty.
Dr. Mark Smith is the founder of Meeting Canary, an AI-powered tool that tracks participation patterns, calculates real-time meeting costs, and nudges teams towards better collaboration. Mark, welcome to Whole Brain at Work.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Karim.
So Mark, tell us a little bit about Meeting Canary. What is it?
Meeting Canary is an app you can download from the Teams App Store, and it provides a physical presence inside your meetings in the form of a canary. The canary displays various animations depending on what it's seeing and hearing in a meeting. And we also provide a sidebar as well, which shows who's contributing, who isn't, how much a meeting is costing, and measures such as focus and energy and inclusion and respect and those sorts of things. After the meeting's closed, we produce summarizations and action points, which end up in the chat of the team's tenant. So nice and secure, and a very comprehensive report about what happened in that meeting and who said what to whom and various other things which help make your meetings better.
Lovely. And tell us, how did you come up with the idea for Meeting Canary?
It's basically a career's worth of irritation about the increase in the amount of meetings that have occurred and the impact that's had on creativity and innovation and progress. So it's a reaction to declining productivity. That's what it truly is.
You've built a technology that holds up a mirror to our meeting culture. When you see organizations seeing that data about how much time and money they're spending in meetings, 23 hours a week in meetings, 70% rating them as unproductive, $8 million lost per 1,000 employees. What's their reaction? Do they laugh? Do they cry? Do they go into denial?
I think mostly they're horrified. I think people often arrive in the conversations with us already horrified, having worked out the size and scale of the problem they face. I think what we can do is also quantify that problem for them as well. All of us experience the same problem with online meetings and the intensity or frequency of them. I think everyone feels the problem is huge, but unlike so many other parts of business, no one knows exactly how big that problem is. The analytics are not there. So initially, it's either horror at what we show them is the problem, or they're recovering from the horror that they already know and then want something that can solve that problem.
Oh, I love that analytical, very precise response to such a visceral problem, Mark. From a whole brain perspective, though, I imagine that different people react differently to that data, right? So if you're more analytical, it's like, oh, finally somebody's got some numbers to explain what I've known to be true, right? And then you have like more relational thinkers who might be like, oh my God, what does this mean for teams? How in the world, how do we fix the morale issues that this might create or that I know are like already happening? Have you noticed any patterns in how some of the different types of leaders or team members you've talked to about this respond to that data?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the most quantitative individuals I work with, and bear in mind I've been running software firms most of my life, they tend to be in that sort of, broadly speaking, in that area. They are relieved to recognize what the problem is, and then sometimes jump a little bit further forwards than one might hope they would. I'll give you a very specific example. One of the things we try to do with Meeting Canary is have a sort of a whole bunch of metrics that we group together in things like focus and energy and respect and inclusion and those sorts of words. There are all sorts of different measures that we put together and weight accordingly to give scores. Now, one of the things we noticed early on, it's not particularly fair to start measuring focus, for instance, until such time as the meeting has started. Now, I'm going to come back to this several times because just that simple phrase opens up a whole Pandora's box of challenges. But let me just give you one simple example. Small talk occurs at the start of meetings. Okay, we did it at the beginning of this meeting. I know that Grace lives near Canada, for instance. So we have this, we make this very human attempt to learn something about each other in order to have a better, happier experience. Now, you can get different types of answers to what you should do with that information. At the extreme end, and we're talking at a sort of high-functioning autistic level, you'll get the brilliant, let's never do small talk ever again, because that can save us 10% of all meeting time, which is sort of where it is. That's not great. But equally, you have people at the other end thinking that, it's perfectly okay to have lots of small talk and then perhaps return to those subjects at the end.
I want to dig into a little bit of how we got here, right? And I've heard you talk about work from home, and many have mentioned that work from home is sort of the inevitable way forward, but that's created some unique challenges for meeting culture, right? Pre-pandemic, we had natural friction, right? We had to book a room and there was travel time between meetings and physical movement that created some sort of a boundary, right? But how has the shift to click a link and you're in another meeting changed things? What are you seeing in the data?
I think there is a challenge with the working from home culture. I however, think that it's not a coincidence that in many advanced economies, there's been a steady decline in productivity over the last 20 years or so. I don't think it's coincidental that during that period, there has been a dramatic rise in the availability of collaboration tools. I don't think you can absolutely prove it, but instinct says if you are taking up 3/4 of my available time by talking at me in lengthy meetings, that is going to have a very significant impact on productivity. So my motive for meeting and my personal motive is to give people their time back so that they can think. Now, I was likening my career to a week. So a measure between Monday and Friday. Now, bear in mind, I'm about sort of Friday morning. That's where I am in my career, okay? If a week is an entire career. So what I've noticed back on sort of Tuesday or so, there was quite a lot more time in business. And work is not just about the grind. It's about the pause and the thinking and the talking to individuals or the reading. I mean, how much time do we have for reading these days, right? Not as much as we used to. And I think what I hope can happen, working from home is brilliant. I've done it all my life. I love it, but not if the working from home is filled with unnecessary meetings. But excessive meetings is reducing productivity and kiboshing innovation, in my opinion.
So what you're describing in economic terms is effectively a transaction cost for meetings that has risen dramatically post-pandemic.
Absolutely. It is. It's crazy. As I look back on last Tuesday, when I was sort of early career, to set up a meeting was a proper pain. I mean, you had to speak to a chairperson, you had to get agendas together, you had to get notes before a meeting, you had to write to people.
This concept of transaction costs is really fascinating. Like if you look at, let's take away the natural barriers. Have you seen differences in meeting patterns, like, let's say, between startups versus large corporations. I work with both. I'm imagining that startups might typically, in your experience, have like totally chaotic, like everyone and everything kind of meetings that work great for those experimental thinkers that we know about, but that absolutely torture the more practical processor types who need some structure. What have you seen?
I think there is a massive cultural difference in the way people engage in startups, and I find that the most exhilarating part of business. When you have so many unknowns, you have so many challenges to overcome. It's just exciting, and your mind fizzes with all the possibilities, but also all the hurdles that you have to overcome. So I think it is a little bit more chaotic. I think it's managed chaos. But I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think in larger organizations, I think there is a culture which is much more akin to literal visibility. I see this again and again with companies judging themselves by the amount of people they can show you with a sweep of an arm across an office somewhere. And I think that's so last millennium, but I think it's undeniably true. But there is also another challenge with what we do in larger organizations as well. You get a lot of, with larger organizations, and rightly so, you get a lot more rules and regulations and a lot more unionization as well. So we're working with companies in Europe where the attitude towards the workers' council or the union may stop us from being able to do what we're doing because, hold on, you're monitoring us. I still think in both cases, too many meetings happen, and that reduces the amount of time you have to literally think. There is so much creativity in everybody's mind, you have to release it. And you will not release it if you have hour after hour after hour of meetings, particularly at certain points in your life as well. If you have children or grandchildren, in my case as well, you haven't even got the breathing space in the evenings or at weekends to think. It disappears. And you need that in work to have the kind of innovations that excite us all. You need time. And that's the thing we're losing.
So you've observed, as have I, that many organizations have consciously or not optimized their meeting culture for actually less effective thinking, right? And that's, as you allude to, sort of the ultimate irony here, right? Which is that we're meeting in many cases to collaborate and innovate, but the meetings themselves might be killing innovation, right? I remember reading some research from Microsoft that shows that there are interruptions every 2 minutes or so. Yes. Right? I feel it myself, right? The urge to jump in with an idea or to contribute a thought, sometimes to the point where it interrupts my ability to actually process what's being said on the other side of the meeting. But, and Stanford says that it takes 25 minutes to recover from each interruption, right? Yes. So I guess, how do you think this constant cognitive fragmentation is impacting our brains?
The very fact that you are advised now to get your ideas across in sort of under 10 seconds on certain social media platforms troubles me. I wish that the world that I worked in was really easy to explain. I sometimes joke that when people ask me for an elevator pitch, I say, I'll do one. It's a really tall building and quite a slow elevator, though. So you need time to explain these things. I started work quite a while ago, so burnout wasn't really a phrase that was used very much. I don't doubt that it existed, but it didn't seem to exist in any way near the levels it does today. And I do put that down to the constant sort of bombardment. And it's not even an intellectual bombardment. It's just a time bombardment of, you've got to do this, you've got to do this. Just remembering the channel through which someone communicated with you these days is a challenge, right? It's a bit of an age thing, but I don't think it is. It's become very complicated, and it's not doing us any good. It's just not. I don't think we are having the breakthroughs that we would have if we weren't doing this nonsense.
I think it'd be interesting to dive in to what Meeting Canary actually reveals. Your technology tracks speaking patterns, interruptions, interaction dynamics. I've seen Karen Snyder's research from her original 2014 study showing men interrupt women 33% more than other men. I've experienced that myself.
I can't now speak, Anne. You know that.
Right. And that women speak only 25% of the time in mixed gendered meetings, yet are perceived as dominating at just 30% participation. So what patterns have surprised you most in looking at your data?
Small talk's very interesting because for the first time, I suspect ever, we can show small talk's duration as impacted on by late arrival. Now, we all know this, and we'll have experienced it this week, where you are in a meeting when somebody, I said it only a couple of hours ago, someone said to me, we just got to wait for Paul to join the meeting. So small talk goes on, okay? And it goes on, And that's surprising, no. Proving the cost of that, really interesting, right? Because you can actually quantify the impact of late arrival. So you can actually say across a company, the impact of this across a company that hires, employs 10,000 people is X million dollars a year. It actually, the surprising outcome may well be to encourage people towards better behavior because it's better for the company. That's one thing that surprised me. Video usage, that one puzzles the hell out of me. I cannot understand why people, with the wonder of the technology we have available to us, are simply refusing to show their faces. That one really puzzles me. And there's a deeply cultural things there, it seems, as well. We have a lot of users in Southeast Asia, and the use of video is very rare. That video off and just listening, well, it's no different from 40 years ago. It was a collaboration tool. It was really odd, actually. So lots of little patterns of data which are intriguing us.
That's really fascinating, Mark. And you've done some really interesting research on different meeting types as well. I'm curious how you've seen different meeting types impact participation patterns. Can you share a bit more there?
There's an enormous amount of research into the types of meetings that occur. And there was a lovely piece of work done by, I think it's Lucid. You may be of Lucid Charts fame, who've come up with this wonderful matrix, which I think I picked it up. I won't read them out, but I'm going to count them. 1, 2, that's 12, 16 meeting types they've picked out. Now, I think that's too many. I think it's too complicated. But for us, certain of the measures that we're making are dependent on the type of meeting that's occurring. For example, if you have a brainstorming meeting and you have 10 people in that meeting, you would hope there will be a contribution from everybody. Okay. Now, if you had a meeting where someone was presenting something, you would imagine you will hear a lot more of a single voice and very little of other voices. So in the context of measuring things like participation and inclusion, the latter example needs to be weighted differently from the former example, because you would expect to have one person dominant. In the first one, the brainstorming, you shouldn't, perhaps. But in the second one, where it's a presentation, you should. So we are sort of cognizant of the meeting type and can make certain adjustments if certain things also happen in a meeting. For example, if somebody is presenting, we change the way that we make certain calculations, because that is a pretty clear indication it's going to be one voice followed by other voices later. But what we need to do, and we're not there yet, is detect at the start of a meeting, possibly when it's set up, and Microsoft are getting better at doing this, but still not as good as they should be. We should be divining from what's been entered. Now, hybrid meetings, that is a challenge. And I think your psychology background is going to be a lot more useful than mine. I can only give you a technical reason why that's so difficult. The explosion in the ability for us to do what we do is as a consequence of the opening up of APIs in products like Teams and Zoom and others, which only happened relatively recently. You combine that with the quality of transcription services, and then you have this sort of dream ability to be able able to take the individual streams of audio that are coming in from Mark or Anne or what have you, and you can quite accurately attribute the words said by Mark, the words said by Anne, and you can also see where those words clash. So you can do things like interruptions or what have you. You can do all of those things. When you have a hybrid meeting where one of the squares on a screen like we're looking at now is 4 or 5 people, you then have the challenge of interpreting who they are, because it might just say conference room 1. And the sorts of ways of doing that, voice signatures and taking asking people to say their name, and it's called diarization as a sort of technical aspect of NLU. It's kind of possible to do it. Now, where we have nothing to contribute yet is the psychology of those outside the room versus those inside the room. So I can only ever speak on that on a sort of anecdotal basis, where my experience is when you have a group of people in the room and there's a handful elsewhere, you tend to forget them, all right? And in a world where chairing a meeting is no longer seen as something you train for or learn to do, it's really easy to just ignore, unless they're the CEO, to your point. But it's quite easy to forget those people outside the room.
From a whole brain perspective, I'm curious if you see meetings favoring more verbal processors, for example, over visual thinkers, or quick responders over more deliberate processors, assertive styles over collaborative ones. Are we systematically excluding certain types of cognitive diversity and the way meetings happen? I just don't know if you've picked up on any of that. I know we'll learn a lot more as we go forward, but what have you seen so far?
My instinct's yes. I think there are behaviors that happen in online meetings which had pretty much died out in face-to-face meetings. I'm a reasonably big chap and have chaired lots of meetings in the past. And a raised eyebrow to a colleague, if they're behaving in a way that I think is inappropriate in a meeting, was often all that was necessary to keep people on the sort of, straight and narrow. I mean, that's an extreme example, but that's gone. Likewise, in face-to-face meetings, someone starting to speak, and then in a face-to-face meeting, someone just starting to type on their computer or pick up their phone and do something or read a book or whatever. That genuinely does happen in loads and loads of meetings you see online, would never happen face-to-face. So I think there's a lot happening online which is creeping back into things that should really have become extinct. The introvert versus the extrovert is a huge challenge. I have several colleagues that I've worked with over the years who are the people. There's one in particular. He's called Matt. You may meet him at some point. And my answer with Matt is always, whenever he says, do that, right? Because I've learnt, whatever he says, just do it. Right? It's some really big technical sort of changes to cloud computing years before other people. Just do what Matt says, right? His contribution, however, is very slight. He listens, he absorbs, he's clearly concentrating, but he says hardly anything, and he speaks at the end. And what he often says at the end has normally blown up everything that was said beforehand. But, and this is where technology may help, we can detect energy, so words per minute and a number of other measures that we make. It is possible to see those quiet contributions leading to a rise in the graph on energy. And so if you can, again, it's a longitudinal thing, you need more data to be certain it can happen. But my instinct is that there'll be a way of showing those people whose contributions are slight, but whose resulting energy levels in a meeting increase. And I think that should be terribly helpful and insightful to the person that's supposed to be chairing the meeting as well.
Here's what I find fascinating. When people can see these analytics in real time, does awareness actually change behavior in the same way that raised eyebrow would in a face-to-face meeting, right? Your tool and the data it provides is so powerful because it makes the invisible visible. If you show someone that they've been speaking for 2 minutes straight, or display the meeting costs ticking up in real time, what happens? Does it create lasting change or just temporary adjustment?
Again, slightly anecdotally, we're seeing a decline in the length of meetings since we introduced the canary, which is a cartoon character that sits in the meeting and has a little roller blind that it pulls down every so often, telling you how much money you've spent if you've configured it correctly, or how what's the collective participation time. There's 10 people spoken for an hour, and there's 10 hours, that sort of thing. It may be anecdotal and the data will show it, but we are seeing a slight reduction in meeting length. And I do wonder whether it's a consequence of those cues.
I mean, this brings us to a fascinating concept from Cal Newport's work, attention as currency, right? He found that knowledge workers have maybe 4 hours of daily deep work capacity, right? But if you're in meetings for 5, 6, 8 hours a day, when does innovation happen? How might meetings and even our days evolve if we measured attention and cognitive load rather than just time and value?
It's got to be better. I mean, it's got to improve. I can't prove this, but innovation happens at the extremes of the bell curve, right? Innovation is not average, okay? So I keep on coming back to the wonders of AI. It's just average. It's always just average. Excitement and innovation is either ends of these. Now, where does that come from? Sometimes it comes from group work. Sometimes it does. I can't deny that. But oftentimes it's that light bulb moment from an individual. So taking that 4 hours that you describe when you are at your best and freeing up half of that or 3/4 of that to allow people to do the extraordinary things that our brains can do and AI can't. It has to. I can't prove that productivity declines are related to collaboration software enhancements. I can't prove it. But I'm fairly sure that I and others are less innovative as a consequence of having our time stolen from us. And it is a form of theft because it's so easy to do and the consequences are so slight. So yes, it can't not be better.
I'm thinking about leaders who consciously or unconsciously genuinely believe that more meetings equals more collaboration equals more innovation. Like there's some sort of a linear relationship. But what you're suggesting is there's actually sort of an inverse correlation, at least after a certain point, kind of like a Laffer curve for collaboration. So what's your response to those leaders?
Well, analyze your data, see what's actually happening, work out what's happening across your organization and where the reality is, and then try, if you can, to quantify innovation. You may be able to do this by proxy measures such as patents or what have you, but I think giving people their time back instinctively should improve the amount of innovation that's occurring. But I do go back to the additional thinking that so many exciting innovations come from tiny teams. The Android operating system was 2 people. Google Maps was 4 people. You have to acknowledge the problem. You have to quantify it first, acknowledge it, and then see if you can create other measures that can show the improvements in productivity. You can't manage what you don't measure, so measure it.
All right, Mark, let's get radical. If you could rebuild workplace collaboration from scratch, no baggage, no legacy systems, would synchronous meetings even exist? Or would we default to asynchronous interactions with any of the tools that are out there from Loom and Notion and Miro and all of those, and really only gather in real time for complex problem solving, relationship building, or high stakes decisions maybe?
It's an interesting one, actually. If I had to sort of describe a workplace that I think works best for me and most of the people I know, it's probably 75% of time away from an office. So I was going to say on your own, but of course none of us really on our own. I mean, we're with our nearest and dearest often, and then a collaboration where you are taking the thoughts you've had, which may have been embellished by the asynchronous interaction. The meeting together, the human condition, is such that those are the moments where your breakthroughs are enhanced 75, 80% of the time. So 4 days a week away from people and 1 day with them. You can't. There's nothing that quite beats the pint after work. And to your point, at the end of the meeting, the conversation that happens where pressure's off, meetings, people are thinking about what they've heard. Often that's where some of the really interesting thoughts come from. It's when you're away from the stage almost.
One thing that I'm really intrigued by, well, actually, maybe before that, it's interesting that you say that because as we've been building a new team for the Ned.ai venture that we're working on, we've been very intentional in designing our work so that it is actually around 75% asynchronous work from home and 25% co-located innovation sprints. So we gather from all different parts of the world once a month for a week to really dive deep together. And of course, there are meetings in between where we connect and line up on things, but we keep those pretty limited and really make the most of the time together face to face to do some of that in-depth innovation work that really moves the needle in terms of progress, right? Especially for a new venture, a new idea, a new product that's getting built. And one of the things that I've seen in the course of that work and more broadly is an idea of using different formats of meetings or gatherings for different purposes, right? I'm really intrigued by this notion. Stanford showed that walking meetings boost creativity by 60%. So now with each of our leadership team offsites, we do a walking component, right? But I guess I'm curious your thoughts on how do we match meeting format, especially with virtual meetings, to purpose and to potentially cognitive or other needs?
If you're going to have a meeting, be respectful of the time that you're taking up from other people and make it absolutely clear the purpose of that meeting. And if you can, the role that you expect the person to attend that meeting to fulfill, right? The contributor. I'm not making, some people like giving presentations, some people don't. I'm not talking about some kind of sort of fascistic imposition of, thou shalt do this. But I think treating meetings with the respect they used to have, because they're really hard to do, is absolutely key. And I think there is a definite gap in corporate ability around chairing as well. I think for all the gendered reasons, for the age reasons, for there's all sorts of societal differences between people that need some proper thinking and proper acceptance and training. Your comment on about men interrupting women more than women interrupt men, it's just true. There's a feminist principle called heat-heating, which was a word invented by, I think it was an American physicist, as I recall, a woman. And heat-heating is the notion that a woman says an idea, it's sort of largely ignored, a man repeats it, and everyone goes, that's a great idea, John, right? I've seen that several times in my career, and it's an outrage. And you need to have the skills. The person chairing or organising the meeting needs to be aware that these things happen and try to, the metaphorical eyebrow raise when that sort of thing happens, or at least returning the origin of the idea back to its owner, that sort of thing. So I think it's. I think we have lost a skill that we had not that long ago, and we need to go back to that and be respectful of time. Because if I'm championing the idea of fewer meetings, the ones that are left need to be much better than they are today, and that's all about organising and being respectful of people.
Well, one of the things that brings to mind for me is what about building in cognitive inclusion by design? For example, multiple modalities for different kinds of learning styles, visual boards, verbal discussion, hands-on kinds of things that you do. AI facilitators ensuring that there is speaking equity, right? That's catching some of the stuff we were just talking about, or even just processing time for different thinking speeds. Is this the future? Do you think that's where we're headed?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think whatever we do, I keep on going back to the idea of nudging. I think there is a danger that you might be shoving rather than nudging if you go too quickly. But I think the idea of what's disturbed me, and I know this has affected you in recent times as well, this sort of kickback from DE&I in recent times, and we all know where that came from, is deeply depressing. And I think we have to not allow the kinds of behaviours that I saw on Tuesday and Wednesday of my career reappearing on Thursday and Friday of my career. So I think, but it's all about progress and change and improvement.
As Meeting Canary evolves, do you see Meeting Canary being a force for nudging in the place so that you would never have to make that intervention? I guess thinking about your evolution, what's your North Star? What does success look like? And how do you see Meeting Canary contributing to that?
Yes, I hope so. I think there are little examples of this in the recent past where, for instance, someone getting medical results, speaking to an avatar, an AI, a machine. Most people are more comfortable with that, actually, than they are speaking to another human being, for whatever reason they are. So I think if we get it right and we are gently improving, and we can look back over a year or 2 years or 3 years and say, we're now having 10% or 15 or 20% fewer meetings, your inclusion rates are going up. You always say you're an equal opportunities employer, but you used to not listen at all to your Indian developers. Now you are. There is more representation at the board level from these kinds of people. And I think that can't, much though I would like it to be a revolution, much though I'd like to fight for that to happen tomorrow.
Aligns with my own vision for meetings, right? Which is that we can reduce the amount of time spent in meetings, but I believe that meetings will be a part of work for the foreseeable future. And what I dream of is that people actually want to attend those meetings because they're energizing rather than draining. Right? Meetings becoming more pull than push, right? But how do we get there from where we are today?
Well, for me as a scientist, it's evidence, not instinct. So it's data. It's always data, and it's enough data, right? So it's a glib and a slightly trite answer to that, but I think I don't know yet how Meeting Canary will impact on large companies. We have large companies using Meeting Canary, but we do not have the tens of thousands of pieces of evidence that we need. So it's happening, but you have to work on the basis of evidence because that's the only way you can show. That comment I made before about equal opportunities employers, right? Prove it. Prove you're an equal opportunities employer, right? Just because you've got loads of, whatever group of people you decide to say in a certain role in the company doesn't mean you're equal. So it's that, and that only comes through numbers. And so, Meeting Canary needs to be used by 100,000 companies. And then I'll come back to this meeting, and then we can say what we've done. And hopefully we've shifted the world a little bit towards being more.
I think so. Mark, this has been a delight and very fun as always. Any final thoughts for our listeners who are drowning in meeting culture right now? Where should they start?
Just stop it. Just stop it. Work out how big the problem is and just stop it. We all know it's mad. We've all just got to collectively say so. I've yet to meet anybody who said, you know what, I want more meetings. So we just got to stop it, and we've got to give ourselves time back to think. And we are an extraordinary species that can do extraordinary things, but not if we're sitting in front of a computer at hours on end doing nothing other than meeting.
Hear, hear.
Wow, that's great. Well, Dr. Mark Smith, founder of Meeting Canary, thank you so much for joining us on Whole Brain at Work.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you both.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to Whole Brain at Work. If you enjoyed this episode, as always, please subscribe and leave a review.
And if you want to learn more about your own thinking preferences and how they show up in meetings, visit thinkharmon.com to take the HBDI assessment.
We'll also make sure to link, as I mentioned, to Meeting Canary in the show notes. highly encourage you to download it. It's available on the Microsoft Teams App Store and provides immediate value for those who want to find themselves drowning less and enjoying more of the meetings that they have every day. Until next time, I'm Kareem Neti.
And I'm Anne Hermanidi, reminding you that better thinking starts with understanding how you think.